I woke up every day already tired, not because of work but because of him. The house felt heavy before I even opened my eyes. I could hear my stepdad moving around, cabinets slamming, the television loud, like he needed the whole place to know he was awake. I stayed quiet. Silence was safer. At breakfast he looked at my plate and said, "Eat fast. Electricity isn't free." I nodded and said, "Okay." He glanced at my phone on the table and added, "If you can afford that thing, you can afford rent." I said, "I help when I can." He laughed once. "You help by breathing my air." My mother sat across from me, staring at her tea like it had answers. I wanted her to say something. She didn't. Every bill in that house had my name written on it, even when it didn't. If the gas was high, it was because I took long showers. If groceries ran out, it was because I ate too much. If something broke, it was because I touched it. He liked to talk while counting money. "See this?" he said one evening, tapping the table. "This is what responsibility looks like. You wouldn't last a week without me." I replied, "I'm trying." He shook his head. "Trying costs money." I offered to work extra shifts. He smirked. "You already cost enough." I cleaned, fixed things, stayed late at work, came home exhausted and still felt like a thief. When relatives visited, he smiled and said, "He's still figuring things out." Then he looked at me and added, "Aren't you?" I forced a smile. Inside, something folded in on itself. My mother squeezed her hands under the table. Later I asked her, "Why don't you say anything?" She whispered, "Please don't make it worse." I said, "It's already bad." She turned away. "You like comparisons? Your cousin bought a car. Your friend moved out. Other people your age don't sit around like this." I said, "I work." He replied, "You exist." One night I stayed up finishing paperwork for a job application. He walked past and said, "Don't get excited. People like you don't go far." I laughed softly and said, "I just want a chance." He stopped and looked at me. "Chances are for investments. You're an expense." I told myself it was tough love. I told myself he wanted me strong. I told myself everyone paid dues. When he said, "You should be grateful I keep you," I answered, "I am." When he said, "I could have sent you away," I said, "Thank you for not doing that." Each word tasted wrong, but I swallowed them anyway. I believed obedience would turn into respect. I believed silence would buy safety. One afternoon he called me into the living room. He had guessed. He pointed at me and said, "This is what happens when you carry dead weight." Someone laughed awkwardly. I felt my face burn. I waited for my mother. She stared at the floor. He continued, "He eats, sleeps, dreams, all on my dime." I said, "That's not true." He raised his eyebrows. "Then explain yourself." I couldn't. The room felt small. My chest felt tight. After they left, I stood there shaking. I said, "Why did you do that?" He shrugged. "Truth hurts." I said, "You didn't have to say it like that." He looked at me calm, bored. "You are a burden. Own it." My mother whispered my name. I didn't answer. That word didn't bounce off me. It stayed. It sat in my head, heavy and permanent. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and repeated it until it sounded like my own voice saying it. I started waking up earlier, not because I wanted to, but because being gone felt safer than being seen. I picked up extra shifts and came home late, hoping effort could replace worth. When I handed my stepdad some cash, he counted it slowly and said, "This barely covers you." I replied, "It's what I made." He smiled thinly. "You'd make more if you listened." I nodded. Listening had become my job. I stopped talking about things I liked. I stopped drawing, stopped running, stopped dreaming out loud. When he asked why I looked tired, I said, "Work?" He said, "Good. Work fixes laziness." My mother watched us from the sink. I wanted her to see me. She kept washing dishes. One night he said, "See how hard he's trying?" Then he added, "Still not enough." I swallowed the comment with my dinner. I apologized for things I didn't do. "Sorry I'm late. Sorry I ate the last piece. Sorry I forgot." He started answering with, "You should be." The words became automatic. When I paid a bill, he told my uncle, "I taught him responsibility." My uncle nodded and said, "He's lucky." I said nothing. Luck didn't feel like this. I met her after a long shift, sitting on the curb outside my job. She asked, "Why do you say sorry so much?" I laughed and said, "Habit." She said, "For what?" I didn't have an answer. She listened without correcting me. When I said, "I'm tired," she said, "You look exhausted." When I said, "I'm fine," she said, "You don't have to be." It scared me how easy it felt. At home, my stepdad noticed the change. "Who are you texting?" he asked. I said, "A friend." He said, "Careful." I asked, "Why?" He replied, "People don't help for free." When I told him about her, he laughed. "She sees a project," he said. "Just like you see this house." I said, "That's not fair." He leaned back. "Reality rarely is." He warned me about responsibility. "Family comes first," he said. "Dreams are expensive." I replied, "I can handle both." He said, "You can barely handle yourself." My uncle agreed. "He means well," he said. I wanted to scream. Instead I said, "I'll try harder." My girlfriend held my hand later and said, "Why do you keep shrinking?" I said, "Because I live there." I worked more, slept less, gave up weekends. When I missed a shift once, my stepdad said, "There it is. Weakness." I explained. He waved me off. Excuses drain people. I felt myself disappearing. With her, I admitted, "I'm scared to leave." She said, "You're already gone." That stayed with me. One night my stepdad said, "If you leave, don't come back." I said, "I'm not leaving." He replied, "Good. Know your place." I looked at the floor. I thought about safety. I thought about air. I thought about how proving myself never ended. I realized staying wasn't earning anything. It was costing me everything. I found out by accident. I was folding laundry when my uncle's name popped up on my phone. I answered thinking it was about work. He said, "So, are you finally pulling your weight?" I froze and asked, "What do you mean?" He laughed and replied, "Your stepdad says you're still struggling." I said, "I'm working nonstop." He paused, then said, "That's not how it sounded." My stomach dropped. I asked, "What did he say?" My uncle cleared his throat. "That you need guidance. That you're ungrateful. That you depend on him." I hung up without saying goodbye. That night I waited until my stepdad sat down. I asked, "Have you been talking about me?" He didn't look up. "I talk about family," he said. I replied, "You told people I'm lazy." He scoffed. "If the shoe fits." I said, "You know that's not true." He leaned back. "Then why do they believe me?" I asked, "Why would you say those things?" He smiled. "To protect you." I felt heat in my chest. "Protect me from what?" He answered calmly, "From embarrassing yourself." I raised my voice. "You made me look useless." He stood up. "You are useless without me." I said, "That's not fair." He pointed at me. "You're betraying this family by questioning me." My mother stepped in and whispered, "Please stop." I turned to her. "Did you know?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't want more fighting," she said. I felt something tear. "So you let him do this?" She replied, "I was trying to keep peace." I said, "By sacrificing me?" She didn't answer. The next day a family friend visited. My stepdad said, "Tell him what you told me." The friend looked at me and said, "He's just motivating you." I asked, "By humiliating me?" The friend shrugged. "Pressure builds character." I laughed once. "It's building fear." My stepdad snapped, "Enough." The friend added, "You should be thankful. Some people get nothing." I said, "I get control." Silence followed. Every conversation after that felt staged. When I spoke, my words came back twisted. When I defended myself, it was called attitude. My stepdad said, "See how defensive he is?" My uncle agreed. Guilty people explain. I stopped explaining. I watched them rewrite me in real time. My mother avoided my eyes. I asked her later, "Why didn't you defend me?" She said, "I didn't want him angry." I replied, "So you chose him?" She whispered, "I chose stability." I nodded. "Not me." I started noticing the pattern. Help came with strings. Food came with guilt. Shelter came with obedience. When I paid for something, he said, "That barely helps." When I asked for space, he said, "You owe me." I realized nothing here was given freely. Everything was leverage. Even kindness had conditions. I said to him one night, "Why do you tell people these things?" He replied, "So they don't expect much from you." I answered, "You're setting me up to fail." He smiled. "I'm keeping you close." I felt exposed everywhere. At work, I wondered who else believed him. At home, I felt watched. With my girlfriend, I finally said, "They think I'm nothing." She said, "Do you?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." She held my face and said, "Then that's the problem." I realized I had been defending people who never defended me. One evening my stepdad said, "You're lucky I put up with you." I replied, "You enjoy it." He frowned. "Watch your tone." I said, "I see it now." He laughed. "See what?" I answered, "That help here is control." He stepped closer. "You need me." I said, "You need me small." That ended the conversation. That night I lay awake and understood something clearly. Staying meant shrinking forever. Leaving meant losing safety. But staying meant losing myself. I didn't feel weak. I felt done. He didn't shout this time. That's what scared me. He sat at the table with his arms crossed and said, "We need to clear something up." I stood there and waited. He continued, "You've been acting ungrateful." I replied, "I've been working." He shook his head. "Work doesn't erase debt." I asked, "What debt?" He said, "Everything I've given you." My chest tightened. "I didn't ask for it," I said. He leaned forward. "That's the problem." My mother hovered near the doorway. I looked at her and said, "Can you say something?" She whispered, "Please don't fight tonight." He smirked. "See? Even she knows when to stop." I said, "I'm not fighting. I'm asking." He replied, "You're challenging me." I asked, "Why does asking feel like disrespect?" He stood up slowly. "Because you owe me obedience." He listed things like charges on a bill. Food, rent, time, patience. I said, "I pay what I can." He laughed. "You exist on credit." I felt my hands shake. "What do you want from me?" He answered without hesitation. "Gratitude. Apologies. Less attitude." I said, "For things I didn't do?" He stared at me. "You apologize for breathing wrong. You can apologize for this." I went to my room and called my girlfriend. I whispered, "I don't know what to do." She said, "What is he asking?" I said, "For me to disappear quietly." She paused, then said, "That's not love." I replied, "It's shelter." She said, "At what cost?" I looked around my room. Bare walls. Borrowed space. I said, "Everything." He knocked once, then opened the door. "You've had time to think," he said. I replied, "I have." He crossed his arms again. "Good. Come apologize." I asked, "And then what?" He said, "Then you stay." I said, "And nothing changes?" He smiled. "You change." I felt something settle in me. "No," I said. He frowned. "No." I nodded. "I'm not apologizing." The room went quiet. He said, "Then you can leave." I waited for fear. It came, but something else came with it. Relief. I said, "Okay." My mother gasped softly. "Please," she said. I looked at her and replied, "I can't keep shrinking." She cried, "Where will you go?" I said, "Anywhere I'm not owned." My stepdad scoffed. "You'll be back." I picked up my bag. "Maybe," I said. "But not like this." I walked past him. He didn't follow. The door closed behind me with a final sound I didn't expect to feel good. Outside the air was cold and sharp. I stood there for a second, breathing like I had just surfaced from water. My phone buzzed. "Did you leave?" my girlfriend asked. "Yes," I said. "Are you safe?" she asked. I looked around the empty street. "I don't know," I replied. "But I'm free." I walked without a plan. A man passed me and glanced once, then kept going. I asked, "Do you know where the bus stop is?" He pointed and said nothing. That hurt more than I expected. No one knew me. No one cared. It was honest. At the bus stop, I sat with my bag between my feet. A woman stood nearby, scrolling her phone. I asked, "Is this the last bus?" She said, "Yeah," without looking up. I missed it anyway. I called my girlfriend again. "I'm scared," I admitted. She said, "I know." I said, "I don't have much." She replied, "You have yourself." I laughed softly. "I'm not sure who that is." She said, "You will be." I closed my eyes and listened to her breathe on the other end. No demands. No conditions. A car slowed nearby. A stranger leaned out and asked, "You okay?" I hesitated, then said, "I'm fine." He nodded and drove off. I watched the taillights disappear. I realized something important. No one was coming to save me. And no one was stopping me either. I sat there until the sky started to change. I thought about going back. I thought about the bed, the heat, the quiet cost of obedience. Then I thought about the word burden. I said it out loud and waited for it to hurt. It didn't as much. I stood up, adjusted my bag, and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time, the direction was mine. I slept on 3 different couches that week. Each one smelled different, felt different, reminded me I didn't belong. The first night my coworker Mark said, "You can crash here." I replied, "Just for a night." He shrugged. "That's how nights work." I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to someone else's fridge hum, someone else's life continue. It felt strange but lighter. No one counted my breaths. At work I kept my head down. I stocked shelves, cleaned floors, took extra shifts. A supervisor walked past and said, "You're quiet." I answered, "I work better that way." He nodded and moved on. No lecture. No insult. That surprised me. During break I counted my cash and said to Mark, "I don't have much." He replied, "Most people don't." I waited for judgment. It didn't come. I started noticing things. When I didn't explain myself, nothing bad happened. When I said no to staying late once, the world didn't end. A customer snapped, "Hurry up." I replied calmly, "I'm doing my best." He rolled his eyes and left. I didn't chase him with apologies. That felt new. One night Mark asked, "Why don't you go home?" I hesitated, then said, "It wasn't safe." He didn't ask for details. He said, "You can stay another night." I replied, "I don't want to be a burden." He laughed. "You're sleeping on a couch, not stealing my car." That word hit me. Burden. Used casually. Powerless. I realized words only hurt when they're sharpened on purpose. I picked up a second job. I learned bus routes. I learned which stores discounted food at night. I learned how to stretch meals. When I counted bills, my hands shook less. When I checked my phone, it didn't feel like a weapon anymore. My girlfriend asked, "How are you holding up?" I said, "Tired." She smiled through the phone. "But standing." I said, "Yes." People started talking. Not to me but around me. Someone said, "I heard your stepdad's hard to deal with." I replied, "I don't talk about him." They nodded and dropped it. Another coworker asked, "Why'd you leave?" I said, "It was time." That was enough. No one demanded proof. No one asked me to justify pain. Mark mentioned something one evening. "Your name came up," he said. I asked, "How?" He replied, "Someone said you're responsible." That surprised them. I laughed quietly. It surprised me too. Later he added, "Your stepdad's not looking great lately." I shrugged. I wouldn't know. And I meant it. I didn't feel curious. That scared me more than anger ever did. I stopped explaining my past. When someone asked, "What happened?" I said, "I moved out." When they pushed, I said, "I'm okay now." Boundaries felt like muscle memory I was still building. Sometimes I overcorrected. Sometimes I apologized out of habit. Each time I caught myself faster. One evening my mother texted, "He's stressed." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. My girlfriend asked, "Do you feel bad?" I thought about it and said, "I feel distant." She nodded. That's allowed. I realized something then. Distance wasn't cruelty. It was protection. I looked at my reflection one night and didn't flinch. I looked tired, thinner, older. But my shoulders weren't hunched. I said out loud, "I don't owe him." It felt strange. Then it felt true. Mark handed me a spare key and said, "Just in case." I took it carefully. "Thank you," I said. He replied, "Don't make it heavy." I smiled. For the first time, help felt like help. Not leverage. Not a debt. Just a door left open. I went to sleep that night knowing something had shifted. I was still struggling. Still counting. Still uncertain. But I wasn't shrinking anymore. And somewhere far away, the power he once held over me was cracking without my help. I heard about him through other voices first. Mark mentioned it casually while making coffee. "Your stepdad still acting like the boss?" he asked. I replied, "I wouldn't know." He hesitated. "People are talking." I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. Silence had taught me how to listen without leaning in. A few days later my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I let it ring. Then it rang again. I answered and said, "Yes?" She sounded tired. "He's been asking about you." I replied, "I'm fine." She said, "Things are tense here." I asked, "Why?" She paused. "People aren't listening to him anymore." I said, "That happens." She whispered, "I wish I had handled things differently." I breathed out slowly. "I wish you had too." The line went quiet. She said, "Do you hate us?" I answered honestly, "No. I just don't live there anymore." She tried again the next week. "He's stressed," she said. "Work is rough." I replied, "I hope it works out." She sounded surprised. That's it. I said, that's all I have. She asked, can you come talk to him? I answered, I'm not ready. She said, he needs you. I replied, I needed you. She didn't argue. She just said, okay. My cousin reached out after that. Can we talk? He asked. I agreed to meet. We sat on a bench near a park. He said, things changed when you left. I asked, how? He shrugged. He yells, people walk away. I nodded. And Mom? He said, quieter. I didn't comment. He continued, they say you were ungrateful. I replied, they can say anything. He looked at me. You don't seem angry. I said, I was. I'm not anymore. He told me about arguments I wasn't part of. About advice ignored. About silence replacing authority. He doesn't like it, my cousin said. I replied, no one does. He asked, do you feel bad? I thought for a moment. I feel clear. He smiled a little. You're different. I answered, I'm consistent. At home, I told my girlfriend about the conversation. She asked, does it bring anything up? I said, it confirms things. She said, like what? I replied, that leaving was enough. She nodded. You don't have to prove anything. I looked at my hands and said, I know. Messages kept coming. Not demanding. Not apologetic. Just uncertain. He's not sleeping, my mother said once. I replied, I hope he rests. Another time she said, he doesn't understand why you won't talk. I typed, deleted, then wrote, I'm protecting myself. She didn't answer after that. I noticed how my body reacted differently now. No shaking. No racing thoughts. When his name appeared on my screen, my pulse stayed steady. That felt like progress. Mark asked one night, you ever think about going back? I said, I think about going forward. He nodded. That's healthier. My cousin messaged again. He misses you, he wrote. I replied, I don't doubt it. He asked, will you help? I typed, not right now. He sent a thumbs up. No pressure. That mattered. I realized something important. The people who respected distance were the ones who deserved closeness. One evening my mother sent a long message. She wrote about regret, fear, mistakes. I read it once. I replied with one line. I'm safe. That was true. It was also enough. I didn't owe emotional labor to people who hadn't protected me when it counted. I thought about revenge once, briefly. About confronting him. About listing every harm. Then I imagined the aftermath. More noise. More control. I set the thought down. Distance was doing the work better than I ever could. My cousin asked, what should I tell them? I said, tell them I'm okay. He said, that's it? I replied, that's the truth. He smiled. You've grown up. I answered, I grew away. I walked home that night feeling light. Not happy. Not sad. Just steady. I understood something clearly then. His power depended on my reaction. Without it, he had nothing to push against. I didn't need to watch his authority crumble. I didn't need updates. I had my own life to live. When my phone stayed silent for a few days, I noticed I slept better. When it buzzed again and I didn't rush to answer, I smiled. Distance wasn't cold. It was calm. And calm, I realized, was justice. I didn't rebuild my life loudly. I rebuilt it carefully. One choice at a time. One habit at a time. When my mentor James first noticed me staying late, he said, you don't have to prove anything here. I replied, I'm not trying to. He smiled. Good. Then you'll last. That stayed with me. James didn't talk down to me. He asked questions. What do you want to learn next? Where do you see yourself? When I hesitated, he said, there's no wrong answer. I wasn't used to that. At home, answers were traps. Here they were doors. I said, I want to be reliable. He nodded. Then start by trusting yourself. I didn't know how to do that yet, but I was learning. My girlfriend noticed the change before I did. One night she said, you don't flinch when your phone buzzes anymore. I laughed softly. I didn't realize I did that. She replied, you did. All the time. I said, I guess I don't expect trouble now. She squeezed my hand. That's growth. I felt it too. A steadiness I hadn't known before. At work, people started asking my opinion. Not because I demanded it, but because I delivered. A coworker said, you're calm under pressure. I answered, I'm used to it. James overheard and said, don't confuse survival with skill. I asked, what's the difference? He replied, skill builds. Survival just endures. I thought about that all night. I stopped explaining my past. When someone asked where I learned discipline, I said, life. That was enough. I didn't need to name the source of pain to prove strength. Respect came quietly. Paychecks grew slowly. My posture changed. I walked into rooms without scanning for danger. That alone felt like success. News reached me in pieces. A comment here. A message there. Your stepdad's business isn't doing great. People stopped asking him for advice. I nodded and said, I hope he's okay. And I meant it in a distant way. Not out of guilt. Out of neutrality. My girlfriend asked, does it feel strange? I said, it feels final. One evening James called me into his office. I'm putting you on a new project, he said. I replied, why me? He smiled. You listen. You don't panic. And you don't need credit. I felt something warm spread in my chest. Not pride. Recognition. He added, you earned this. No strings. No reminders of debt. Just facts. That night my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I let it sit. Later she texted, he's having a hard time. I typed back, I'm working late. That was true. It was also a boundary. I didn't know updates. I didn't know reassurance. I owed myself continuity. My cousin messaged me once more. They talk about you differently now, he said. I asked, how? He replied, like they can't reach you. I smiled. That was the point. He added, he's frustrated. I answered, he'll adjust. My cousin paused, then wrote, you're calm. I replied, I'm busy. And I was. At dinner, my girlfriend said, you're lighter. I said, I'm not carrying things that aren't mine. She raised her glass. To that. I raised mine too. I thought about the word burden and realized I hadn't heard it in weeks. It didn't echo anymore. It had lost its grip. James asked me one afternoon, who taught you resilience? I opened my mouth then closed it. I said, I taught myself. He nodded. That's the best kind. I believed him. For the first time, I believed someone without needing proof. I heard later that my stepdad asked about me at a gathering. Someone answered, he's doing well. That was it. No qualifiers. No ownership. Just my name standing on its own. I didn't hear it directly. I didn't need to. Knowing it existed was enough. I realized something important then. Success didn't feel like revenge. It felt like silence where fear used to be. I didn't imagine confronting him. I didn't imagine explaining myself. I imagined tomorrow. And that was new. That night, as I locked my door and turned off the light, I said out loud, I built this. No one argued. No one corrected me. The life he said I couldn't build was already standing around me, quiet and solid. And for the first time, it belonged only to me. He called me late in the evening. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. I answered and said, what do you want? He cleared his throat. To talk, he said. I replied, you're talking. Silence stretched between us. I hear you're doing well, he said. I answered, I am. He hesitated. You didn't need to cut us off. I said calmly, you cut me first. He sighed. You always exaggerate. I replied, you always minimize. That stopped him for a moment. He asked if we could meet. I said, where? He named a cafe near my work. I agreed, not because I owed him anything but because I wanted to see what I felt when he was in front of me again. When I arrived, he was already seated. He looked smaller. Not weaker. Smaller. He said, you look different. I replied, I am. He forced a smile. Sit. I sat. He didn't start with apologies. He never did. Things have been hard, he said. I nodded. I heard. He leaned forward. I could use some help. I asked, what kind? He avoided my eyes. Money. Advice. Connections. I waited. He added, family support. I said, you taught me not to depend on anyone. He frowned. That's not what I meant. I replied, it's what you practiced. He shifted in his chair. I was trying to prepare you for the real world. I answered, you were trying to keep me small. He scoffed. That's dramatic. I said, it's accurate. He lowered his voice. You wouldn't be here without me. I replied, I wouldn't be free with you. That landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened. He said, I sacrificed for you. I asked, did you? He said, I gave you a roof. I replied, you charged me shame. He shook his head. You don't appreciate anything. I said, I appreciate peace. He laughed once nervously. You think you're better than me now? I answered, I think I'm not owned. His smile disappeared. He tried another angle. Your mother is struggling. I replied, she can call me. He said, she's afraid of making things worse. I answered, so was I. He rubbed his hands together. You don't forgive easily. I said, I forgive quietly. He looked at me closely. Then why won't you help? I replied, because help shouldn't come with fear. He leaned in. I need you. I didn't flinch. You need control, I said. You always did. He shook his head. That's not fair. I replied, fair stopped mattering a long time ago. He exhaled sharply. If you help me now, things can go back to normal. I smiled slightly. This is normal now. He stared at me like he was searching for the old version of me. You used to listen, he said. I replied, I used to be scared. He said, I made you strong. I answered, you made me quiet. His hands trembled. People don't respect me anymore. I said, respect isn't demanded. He snapped, I earned it. I replied, you enforced it. For the first time he sounded tired. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded. I believe that. He looked relieved. Then I added, intent doesn't erase impact. He opened his mouth then closed it. So that's it, he asked. I said, that's enough. He whispered, you're walking away. I answered, I already did. He reached across the table then stopped himself. I thought you'd come back, he said. I replied, I thought I would too. He asked, don't you feel anything? I paused. I feel clear. He laughed bitterly. You always think you're right. I said, I'm not trying to be right. He asked, then what are you trying to be? I replied, whole. He looked down at the table. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I stood up. That's not my job. He said my name quietly. I stopped but didn't turn around. I never wanted you gone, he said. I answered without facing him. You just wanted me small. That was the truth. It didn't need more words. Outside the air felt open. My phone buzzed. My girlfriend asked, how did it go? I said, it ended. She replied, how do you feel? I took a breath. Light. She smiled through the phone. I'm proud of you. I said, so am I. I started walking. I realized then that dominance doesn't always end with a fight. Sometimes it ends with refusal. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself. I didn't give him what he wanted. And in that quiet space his power disappeared. He called me a burden once. Now he wanted my help. He never understood the difference between need and control. I did. And I chose myself. I wake up now without checking my phone first. That used to be impossible. Mornings once began with tension, with the question of who might need something from me, who might be disappointed, who might remind me of what I owed. Now I wake up and stretch and decide my own pace. When my girlfriend asks, coffee or tea? I answer without hesitation. Coffee, I say. Choice still feels new but it no longer feels dangerous. At work, James stops by my desk and says, you handled that situation well yesterday. I reply, I just did what made sense. He smiles. That's growth. I don't deflect the compliment. I say, thank you. That matters more than I realized. I used to believe praise was a setup. Now it's just information. On my way home, my phone buzzes. It's my mother. I read the message once. I hope you're okay. I reply, I am. That's the truth. I don't add explanations. I don't add reassurance. I don't feel the urge to manage her emotions. When she replies, I'm glad, I let it sit. Distance has turned our conversations honest. Short. Real. That night my girlfriend says, you seem lighter lately. I ask, is that good? She laughs. It's peaceful. I think about that word. Peaceful. I once confused peace with silence. Now I know the difference. Silence hid fear. Peace holds space. I say, I don't feel like I'm running anymore. She replies, you're standing. I nod. That's exactly it. Sometimes memories still surface. A comment, a look. The way the word burden used to land like a verdict. When it comes up now, it feels distant, like something I once carried but set down. I say it out loud once just to test it. Burden. The word feels hollow. Empty. I realize it never described me. It described how he saw the world. James asks me during a meeting, where do you see yourself in a year? I answer honestly. Stable. Curious. Still learning. He says, that's a solid plan. No laughter. No correction. I leave the room feeling grounded. Not inflated. Grounded. I hear less and less about my stepdad. When I do, it doesn't spike anything in me. A cousin mentions, "He's quieter now." I reply, "I hope that helps him." And I mean it in a distant, human way. Not out of obligation. Not out of guilt. Just acknowledgement. I don't feel the need to fix anything. I don't feel responsible for the consequences of his choices. One evening my mother calls. I answer. She says, "I think about you a lot." I reply, "I know." She pauses. "I'm sorry." I don't rush to comfort her. I say, "Thank you." She asks, "Can we start over?" I consider it. "We can talk," I say. Slowly. She agrees. "That's enough for now." Later my girlfriend asks, "Was that hard?" I shake my head. "It was calm." She smiles. "That's new." I laugh. "It is." Calm used to feel like waiting for something bad. Now it feels like arriving. I take a walk alone sometimes just to remind myself where I am. I notice how my shoulders sit naturally now. How my breathing doesn't shorten when I hear footsteps behind me. I think about the life I live. It isn't dramatic. It isn't perfect. It's mine. That realization settles deeper than pride ever did. At dinner, James raises a toast and says, "To people who build themselves." I lift my glass. I don't think about where I came from. I think about where I am. That's another shift. The past no longer defines the present. It informs it. That's different. I sit on my couch later that night and reflect, not with sadness but with clarity. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't win anything. I survived. I chose myself when it mattered. I walked away from a story that required me to stay small to belong. I wrote a new one quietly. The word burden doesn't follow me anymore. It stays where it belongs in someone else's regret. I don't carry it. I don't explain it. I don't fight it. I let it go. When I turn off the light and lie down, I feel something simple and steady. Self-respect. Not loud. Not defensive. Just present. I close my eyes knowing tomorrow belongs to me, not because I earned permission but because I finally understood I never needed it.